Driver, stay in the vehicle. This is soldier work. The sergeant's dismissive words echoed in Private First Class Aria Davis's mind as she watched the convoy roll out without her. 22 years old, 9 months in the Army, and everyone saw her the same way. Just the base driver, the girl who ferried officers between buildings, too small and too quiet to be a real soldier. But when 30 enemy fighters ambushed the patrol that had left her behind, when the radios went silent and the gunfire started, Aria did something no one expected. She grabbed the M249 saw from the armory, climbed into her SUV, and drove straight into hell. What happened in the next 3 hours would force every soldier on that base to redefine what they thought they knew about courage, capability, and the quiet private they'd all underestimated. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the gun, it's the warrior nobody saw coming. Private First Class Aria Davis had been called a lot of things during her 9 months at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. The taxi service, Officer Uber, that quiet girl who drives. But her favorite, delivered with maximum condescension by Staff Sergeant Marcus Kowalski, was just a base driver. She was small, barely 5'4", with dark hair always pulled back in a regulation bun and brown eyes that people described as soft or gentle. At 22, she looked even younger, which didn't help. The other soldiers treated her like a mascot, a kid sister, someone to be protected rather than counted on. What they didn't know, what nobody bothered to ask, was that Aria had grown up in rural Montana on a ranch where shooting wasn't a hobby, it was survival, where her father had taught her to handle everything from pistols to hunting rifles before she was 10, where she'd learned that being underestimated was sometimes the best tactical advantage you could have. The Army had assigned her to motor pool duty, drive officers to meetings, transport supplies between buildings, shuttle visiting dignitaries around the base. It wasn't what she'd signed up for when she'd enlisted, dreaming of serving on the front lines, but the military had a way of putting people in boxes based on first impressions. This Tuesday morning started like every other. Aria performed her pre-operation checks on the armored SUV assigned to her, a heavy reinforced vehicle designed to withstand small arms fire and minor explosives. She checked tire pressure, fluid levels, communication systems, everything by the book, everything perfect. "Davis!" Sergeant Kowalski's voice cut across the motor pool. "Need you to run Colonel Patterson to the communications building. VIP transport." "Yes, Sergeant." Aria grabbed her keys, her sidearm, a standard-issue Beretta M9 that she was required to carry but had never fired in combat, and headed to pick up the colonel. As she drove him across the base, Colonel Patterson sat in the back, absorbed in paperwork, barely acknowledging her existence. She was furniture to him, a function rather than a person. When they arrived, he got out without a word, not even a thank you. Aria parked the SUV and waited, as she always did, ready for the next assignment. That's when the radio crackled to life with a transmission that would change everything. All units, Patrol Echo 6 is under attack. We have contact, heavy contact, grid coordinates." Static drowned out the rest, followed by the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire and shouting. Aria's blood ran cold. Echo 6 was the patrol that had left the base an hour ago, 12 soldiers sent to check on a reported disturbance in a village 8 kilometers away. Sergeant Kowalski had been with them. So had Lieutenant Brennan, Corporal Hughes, and 9 others. The radio erupted with frantic transmissions. "We're pinned down. At least 30 hostiles. We need backup now." "Echo 6, this is base command. Reinforcements are being organized. Hold your position." "We can't hold. They're everywhere. We need." The transmission cut off in a burst of static and gunfire. Aria sat frozen in her SUV, listening to the chaos unfold. Around her, the base exploded into activity. Soldiers ran to their positions. Officers shouted orders. The quick reaction force was being mobilized, but that would take time. Time to gear up, time to plan, time to move out. Time that Echo 6 didn't have. She looked at the armory building, just 50 meters away. Inside were weapons, ammunition, gear. And she knew, because she'd delivered supplies there countless times, that there was an M249 saw, a light machine gun capable of laying down devastating suppressive fire. Arya made a decision that would either save lives or end her military career. She ran. The armory sergeant, a middle-aged specialist named Torres, looked up in surprise as she burst through the door. "Davis? What are you—" "Echo 6 is being massacred," Arya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I need the saw." Torres blinked. "The M249? You're a driver. You're not authorized for—" "There's no time." Arya's voice cracked like a whip, startling both of them. "Our people are dying right now. Give me the weapon or I'll take it." Something in her eyes, a hardness Torres had never seen before, made him step aside. Arya grabbed the M249, a belt-fed machine gun that weighed 17 pounds fully loaded. She slung it over her shoulder, grabbed 4 extra ammunition boxes, and ran back to her SUV. She threw the gear in the passenger seat, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. The armored SUV roared to life, its reinforced frame and bulletproof glass suddenly feeling less like protection and more like a weapon. "Private Davis, what the hell are you doing?" Torres's voice came through her radio. "You need authorization to leave the base." Arya switched off the radio and drove toward the main gate. The guards there, 2 privates she'd driven around dozens of times, stepped out, confused. One of them, Private First Class Jackson, raised his hand for her to stop. She didn't. "Davis, you can't leave. You need orders." Arya leaned out the window as she approached, not slowing down. "Echo 6 is dying. I'm going to get them. Move or get run over, your choice." Jackson saw something in her face that made him step aside. The other guard did the same. The barrier lifted, and Arya drove through, leaving the safety of forward operating base Sentinel behind. The road to the ambush site was 8 kilometers of rough terrain, winding through rocky hills and sparse vegetation. Arya pushed the SUV hard, its heavy frame bouncing over ruts and stones. Through the windshield, she could see smoke rising in the distance, the site of the ambush. Her hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle intensity. She'd never been in combat, never fired a weapon in anger, never faced an enemy who was actively trying to kill her. Everything she knew came from training exercises, from her childhood on the ranch, from countless hours at the firing range, trying to prove she was more than just a driver. Now she was about to find out if any of that was enough. As she crested a hill, she saw them. The ambush had happened in a small valley where the road narrowed between rocky outcroppings, a perfect kill zone. 2 American Humvees sat disabled, one burning, the other riddled with bullet holes. Bodies lay on the ground, and Arya's heart seized until she saw movement. Survivors pinned down behind the vehicles, returning fire against an enemy force that had them completely surrounded. She counted quickly. At least 30 hostiles positioned in the rocks, firing down on her trapped comrades. The Americans were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Arya slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding to a stop on high ground overlooking the ambush site. She grabbed the M249, kicked open her door, and took up position behind the engine block, the most armored part of the vehicle. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When you're outgunned, you need surprise and aggression. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't stop until the threat is neutralized." Arya deployed the Saw's bipod on the hood of the SUV, loaded the ammunition belt, and chambered the first round. The weapon felt heavy in her hands, but familiar. She'd trained on it, even if nobody had ever expected her to use it. Through the iron sights, she found her first target, a fighter positioned in the rocks, firing down on the trapped American soldiers. Arya took a breath, let it out halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The M249 roared to life. The sustained burst of automatic fire was deafening. Tracer rounds streaked across the valley, and her first target simply ceased to exist, torn apart by the concentrated fire. Arya shifted her aim, found another target, fired again, and again, and again. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the enemy. They'd been focused on the trapped Americans, confident in their superior numbers and position. They hadn't expected a machine gun to open up on their flank from high ground. Arya worked the weapon with mechanical precision, firing in controlled bursts, exactly as she'd been trained. 5 to 7 rounds, shift, fire again. Conserve ammunition, maintain accuracy, keep the pressure constant. Enemy fighters scrambled, trying to locate this new threat. Some turned their weapons toward her position, and bullets began impacting the SUV's armored frame, spiderwebbing the bulletproof glass but not penetrating. She kept firing. Below, the trapped American soldiers realized what was happening. Sergeant Kowalski's voice cracked over the radio. Arya had left it on in the SUV, and now she could hear the amazement and hope in his tone. "Who the hell is that? Who's providing covering fire?" Lieutenant Brennan's response was equally shocked. Is that Davis? "Whoever it is, they just saved our asses. All units, use this distraction, advance and engage." The American soldiers moved, using Arya's devastating suppressive fire to break out of their pinned position. They advanced in combat formation, their own weapons adding to the chaos, catching the enemy in a crossfire. Arya reloaded, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as her heart hammered in her chest. Bullets whizzed past her, striking the SUV, kicking up dirt around her position. She felt the heat of a round pass close enough to her face to feel its passage. She didn't stop. An enemy fighter appeared from behind a rock, closer than the others, bringing up an RPG launcher. If he fired, the SUV would be destroyed, and Arya with it. She swung the M249, didn't bother with the sights at this range, and fired from the hip. The burst caught him center mass and he went down, the RPG launcher clattering unfired to the ground. "Davis, fall back to cover!" Lieutenant Brennan's voice on the radio. "You're too exposed!" But Arya couldn't fall back. The American soldiers were still in the kill zone, still vulnerable. If she stopped providing covering fire now, the enemy would regroup, and her friends would die. So she stayed, and she kept firing. The M249 was getting hot now, heat waves rising from the barrel, but it didn't jam, didn't fail. Arya fed it ammunition, and it delivered death with mechanical efficiency. The enemy force began to break. They'd expected an easy ambush of a small patrol, not a determined defense backed by a machine gun on high ground. Their casualties were mounting. Arya had personally dropped at least 8, and the advancing American soldiers were accounting for more. "They're retreating," Corporal Hughes's voice, energized by sudden hope. "The bastards are running." But retreating didn't mean defeated. A group of 5 enemy fighters pulled back toward a cluster of rocks where they could regroup, and if they established a new defensive position, this would turn into a prolonged firefight that the Americans, low on ammunition, couldn't win. Arya made another decision. She grabbed the M249, left the relative safety of the SUV, and advanced on foot. "Davis, what are you doing?" Brennan's voice was frantic. "Get back to your vehicle." She didn't respond. She was focused entirely on the 5 fighters scrambling toward cover. They hadn't seen her yet. They were focused on the American soldiers advancing from their front. Arya moved quickly but carefully, using the terrain for concealment, her Montana upbringing guiding her movements. She'd stalked deer through rougher country than this. She got within 30 meters before they spotted her. The lead fighter turned, his eyes widening in shock at seeing a lone American soldier, a small woman barely visible under her gear, advancing toward 5 of them with a machine gun. He raised his rifle. Arya fired first. The M249 spoke with brutal authority. At this range, with no obstructions, the sustained burst was absolutely devastating. The lead fighter went down, then the second, then the third. The 4th tried to run. She cut him down. The 5th got off a wild burst of automatic fire that went nowhere near her before she ended him. 5 enemy fighters eliminated in less than 10 seconds. The valley fell silent. Arya stood there, the M249 smoking in her hands, breathing hard, her ears ringing from the sustained gunfire. Around her, bodies lay scattered, the enemy force she'd decimated, the ambush she'd destroyed. Behind her, American soldiers advanced, securing the area, checking for remaining threats. They moved past her position, giving her strange looks. This quiet driver who'd somehow transformed into a one-woman army. Sergeant Kowalski approached, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. "Davis? What the hell was that?" Arya lowered the M249, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "My job, Sergeant. I'm a soldier, same as you." "You just killed—" He looked around, counting. "Davis, you took out at least 15 of them yourself, maybe more." 32, Lieutenant Brennan said, joining them. He'd been doing a count. 32 confirmed enemy KIA, 15 directly attributable to Private Davis's fire. The rest broke and ran or were eliminated during our advance, which was only possible because of her covering fire. He looked at Arya with something like awe. You saved all of us. Corporal Hughes appeared, carrying a radio. Lieutenant, Command is demanding a status update. They're asking about the unauthorized vehicle that left the base. They're asking about... He paused, looking at Arya. They're asking about the base driver who stole a machine gun and went AWOL. Arya's stomach dropped. In the heat of the moment, she'd forgotten about the consequences of her actions. She'd violated orders, taken weapons without authorization, left the base without permission, court-martial offenses, all of them. Tell Command, Lieutenant Brennan said slowly, that Private First Class Arya Davis engaged and eliminated a superior enemy force, prevented the annihilation of Echo 6 patrol, and single-handedly turned the tide of an ambush that would have resulted in 12 American casualties. He looked at Arya, then at Kowalski. Tell them we're bringing home a hero. The ride back to base was surreal. Arya drove, the M249 secured in the back, while the rest of Echo 6 followed in their damaged vehicles. Her hands were steady on the wheel now, the shaking having passed, replaced by a strange calm. When they rolled through the gate, the entire base was waiting. Word had spread. The radio chatter, the reports, the impossible story of the quiet driver who'd become a warrior. Soldiers lined the route, watching in silence as Arya's SUV passed, followed by the battered patrol she'd saved. Colonel Patterson stood at the motor pool, his face unreadable. Beside him was the base commander, a full-bird colonel named Elizabeth Hendricks, who Arya had driven exactly twice and who'd never spoken more than 3 words to her. Arya parked, stepped out, and came to attention, waiting for whatever came next. Colonel Hendricks approached, studying her with sharp eyes that missed nothing, the dirt on her uniform, the gunpowder residue on her hands, the set of her jaw that was more defiant than apologetic. Private First Class Davis, Hendricks said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent motor pool. You violated multiple regulations today. You took weapons without authorization. You left the base without orders. You engaged enemy forces without command approval. Yes, ma'am, Arya said quietly. You also, Hendricks continued, and now there was something different in her tone. Saved the lives of 12 American soldiers. You engaged and neutralized a superior enemy force. You demonstrated initiative, courage, and combat effectiveness that exceeded anything we've seen from soldiers with 10 times your experience. She paused, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass object. Colonel's insignia. I'm told, Hendricks said, holding up the insignia, that Sergeant Kowalski called you just a base driver. Is that correct? Arya's jaw tightened. Yes, ma'am. Hendricks turned to Kowalski, who'd approached with the rest of Echo 6. Sergeant, would you like to revise that assessment? Kowalski stepped forward, came to attention, and looked directly at Arya. Ma'am, Private Davis is not just a base driver. She's not just a soldier. She's a goddamn warrior, and I was wrong to ever suggest otherwise. Around them, the gathered soldiers began to applaud. It started slowly, then built, until the entire motor pool was filled with the sound of recognition, of respect finally given where it was long overdue. Hendricks silenced them with a raised hand. Private Davis, you're being recommended for the Bronze Star with Valor device. Your actions today will be studied, analyzed, and used as an example of what one soldier can accomplish when training, courage, and determination align. She paused. You're also being reassigned. The 75th Ranger Regiment has requested your transfer. They want soldiers who can think under pressure and fight like hell when necessary. Interested? The Rangers, elite infantry, the best of the best, everything Arya had dreamed of when she'd enlisted. Yes, ma'am, she said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. Very interested. Good. Report to Colonel Patterson tomorrow morning for your new assignment details. Hendricks stepped back, then offered something rare, a smile. Outstanding work, soldier. You've proven something important today. What's that, ma'am? That the most dangerous warriors are often the ones nobody sees coming. As the crowd dispersed, Lieutenant Brennan approached Arya. You know, he said quietly, I drove past you every day for 9 months, never said more than morning to you. Never asked about your story, your training, who you were beyond your job. Yes, sir. That was my failure, not yours. I made assumptions based on your size, your gender, your assignment. I saw what I expected to see instead of what was actually there. He extended his hand. It won't happen again. To you or to anyone else. Arya shook his hand, appreciating the apology more than he could know. Sergeant Kowalski was next. The man who'd dismissed her, who'd coined the just a base driver phrase that had cut deeper than he'd realized. Davis, I point. He struggled for words. I've been a soldier for 15 years. I've seen combat in 3 different countries, and today you taught me something I should have learned a long time ago, that courage doesn't have a size requirement, and warriors come in all forms. Sergeant, you don't have to— Yeah, I do. He looked at the M249 being unloaded from her SUV. You saved my life today. You saved all of us, and you did it after I spent months treating you like you didn't matter, like you were less than a real soldier. He came to attention and saluted her, a gesture of respect from a superior to a subordinate that was technically incorrect but emotionally perfect. It's an honor to serve with you, Private Davis. Hell, it's an honor to have been saved by you. Arya returned the salute, blinking back unexpected tears. Over the next few hours, as reports were filed and the official investigation began, more details emerged. The enemy force had been a well-organized cell planning to attack the base itself. The ambush of Echo 6 had been their first strike, meant to draw out and eliminate the quick reaction force, leaving the base vulnerable. Arya's intervention had done more than save 12 soldiers. It had disrupted an entire enemy operation. The investigation into her unauthorized actions was swift and definitive. Colonel Hendricks personally intervened, declaring that Arya had acted within the spirit of military necessity, that her tactical judgment had been sound, and that second-guessing a soldier who'd saved American lives was not how this command operated. The Bronze Star recommendation was upgraded to a Silver Star. The transfer to the Rangers was approved, and quietly, throughout the base, attitudes began to shift. Soldiers who'd ignored Arya now sought her out, wanting to hear the story firsthand. The motor pool became a destination rather than a backwater. And most importantly, the automatic assumptions about size, about gender, about who could be a warrior, started to crack. 3 days later, Arya stood in her quarters, packing her gear for the transfer to Ranger training. On her bunk lay the new uniform she'd need, the patches that would mark her as something different, something more than she'd been allowed to be. A knock on her door interrupted her packing. She opened it to find Torres, the armory sergeant who'd given her the M249. Got something for you, he said, holding out a case. Inside was the M249 she'd used in the ambush, cleaned, serviced, and with a small brass plate affixed to the stock, PFC Arya Davis, 32, FOB Sentinel. 32 confirmed kills, Torres explained. Command approved it as a presentation piece. You earned it. He paused. Plus, I figured if you're going to the Rangers, you'll need a weapon you're already familiar with. Arya ran her hand over the machine gun, remembering the weight of it, the way it had felt in her hands as she'd stood between her friends and death. Thank you, Sergeant. No, Davis. Thank you. Torres stepped back, came to attention, and saluted. For reminding all of us that we're supposed to judge soldiers by their actions, not our assumptions. After he left, Arya sat on her bunk, holding the weapon that had transformed her from overlooked driver to recognized warrior. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the ranch in Montana, the decision to enlist, the 9 months of being invisible, the 3 hours of combat that had changed everything. She thought about Sergeant Kowalski's words. Just a base driver. And she smiled, because she'd proven something that day, something important not just for her, but for every soldier who'd ever been underestimated, dismissed, or put in a box because of how they looked or what job they'd been assigned. Warriors aren't defined by their assignments, they're They're defined by what they do when the moment comes, when lives hang in the balance, when courage is the only currency that matters. Aria Davis had been called a lot of things. Taxi service, officer Uber, just a base driver. Now she'd be called something else, Ranger. And the enemy who'd learned too late what she was capable of, they wouldn't be calling her anything at all. The next morning, as she drove off base for the last time, this time with full authorization and official orders, soldiers lined the route again. But this time they weren't watching in shocked silence. This time they were saluting, recognizing, celebrating. Aria returned each salute, her eyes forward, her posture perfect. The quiet driver who'd become a legend, heading toward a future where she'd never be underestimated again. But as the base disappeared in her rearview mirror, something unexpected happened. A convoy of 3 vehicles fell in behind her. An escort, she realized, Lieutenant Brennan's Humvee, followed by Sergeant Kowalski's transport and Corporal Hughes bringing up the rear. Her radio crackled. "Davis, this is Brennan. We figured you shouldn't make this trip alone. Echo 6 escorts its own." "Sir, that's not necessary." "It's not about necessary," Kowalski's voice cut in. "It's about respect. You drove into hell for us. Least we can do is drive you to your new assignment." Aria felt emotion tighten her throat. These warriors, men who'd initially dismissed her, were now honoring her as one of their own. The transformation was complete. The circle closed. They drove together for 2 hours, the convoy moving through territory that Aria had once thought she'd never see beyond the confines of a base. When they finally reached the Ranger training facility, the 3 vehicles pulled up alongside her SUV. The soldiers got out, formed up, and as Aria stepped from her vehicle for the last time as a motor pool driver, they came to attention and saluted in perfect unison. "Private First Class Aria Davis," Lieutenant Brennan announced formally. "Echo 6 Patrol wishes you the best in your new assignment. You saved our lives, and we will never forget it. You go forward now, not just as a soldier, but as a proven warrior. Make us proud." "Sir, you already made me proud," Aria replied, her voice steady despite the emotion. "All of you did. You gave me something I needed. You saw me. Really saw me. Not for what you assumed I was, but for what I proved I could be." Sergeant Kowalski stepped forward. "Davis, one more thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a patch, Echo 6's unit insignia. Command approved it. "You're officially part of Echo 6, honorary member, because you bled with us, fought with us, and by God, you saved us when no one else could." He handed her the patch, and Aria held it like the precious gift it was, a symbol of acceptance, of belonging, of warriors recognizing another warrior. "I'll wear it with honor, Sergeant." "We know you will. Now get in there and show those Rangers what a real soldier looks like." They saluted one final time, then returned to their vehicles and drove away, leaving Aria standing at the entrance to her new life. She looked down at the patch in her hand, then at the facility ahead where new challenges awaited. The doubts were gone now, burned away in the fire of combat. She knew who she was, what she was capable of, and more importantly, she knew that she had earned her place among warriors. Aria Davis walked through the gates, the M249 case in one hand, her orders in the other, and Echo 6's patch over her heart. Behind her was the driver everyone had dismissed. Ahead of her was the Ranger she'd always been meant to be. And somewhere, on a ranch in Montana, her father, who'd taught her to shoot before she could drive, who'd always known she was destined for more, would be smiling, proud of the warrior his daughter had become. The Ranger selection cadre waited at the entrance, a group of hardened instructors known for breaking even the toughest candidates. Their leader, a grizzled master sergeant with 30 years of service, stepped forward as Aria approached. "Private Davis!" His voice was granite, his eyes measuring her from head to toe, taking in her small frame with obvious skepticism. "Yes, Master Sergeant. I've read your file. Impressive combat record for someone with 9 months of service. But this isn't a 3-hour firefight. This is months of the hardest training the Army offers. Most men twice your size wash out in the first week." He paused, studying her. "You sure you belong here?" Aria met his gaze without flinching, remembering the valley, the M249 in her hands, the moment she'd proven everyone wrong. She thought about Sergeant Kowalski's salute, about Torres stepping aside in the armory, about 12 lives saved because she'd refused to accept their limitations. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice quiet but absolutely certain, "I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do, where I don't belong, who I'm supposed to be." She shifted the M249 case slightly, feeling its weight, the weight of 32 enemy fighters who'd underestimated her, the weight of 12 American soldiers who now lived because she'd acted. "I'm not here to prove I belong. I'm here because I already know I do. The only question is whether you're ready to find out what happens when you actually give someone like me a chance." The Master Sergeant's expression didn't change for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Fall in, Ranger candidate. Let's see if that fire in your belly burns as hot as your record suggests." He turned toward